Welcome. The show is in honor of a show for veterans' families, and the general public. And we strive to bring information that's important to the veteran that's out there. And God knows there's an awful lot of us on Staten Island and in the city of New York. A few years ago, a program was started. It was the New York State Veterans Defenders Program. And we are honored to have the Deputy Director, Roy Diehl, as a guest today. And a co-host, Paul Dietrich, is with us every show, and he helps put these things together. Paul is actually a mentor in that program. And with that being said, Paul, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Roy, great to have you here, and thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you for yours.
Can you tell us a little bit about your service? I know you went through more than one branch there, huh?
Yeah, I started off in Navy ROTC back in 1977 at Cornell University, back when Vietnam was still fresh enough that I actually got spat on in uniform walking across campus. Strange things to think about. But I ended up leaving Navy, and a few years later, 1984, I enlisted in the Army.
Well, we can see that you had good decision making and that you left the Navy. Sorry, Ed.
Got lots of respect for the Navy. I actually spent a few weeks on a destroyer in the Pacific, so a wonderful all expense paid trip to Pearl Harbor. Got to see what the ocean looks like up close and personal. But when I enlisted in '84, I ended up going through basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is kind of the opposite of the Pacific. It was cold, it was muddy, it was cloudy, it was rather miserable. But that only lasted so long before it got hot and humid, and well, that ended. I enlisted to be a Russian linguist. So ended up spending a year and a half studying Russian in Monterey, California. Then a few months in Texas, learning how to do my job, and then 3 years in southern Germany, keeping track of the Soviets, back when there was a Soviet Union with 5 armies in what used to be East Germany. So that was back in the day. When I left active duty, I went to law school, Albany Law, and I went in the New York Army National Guard to be a tanker. So
you're too tall for a tanker.
Well, it was an interesting thing because as a linguist, we were working with computers, and it's cutting edge stuff, and computers would lock up on you. You're in the middle of the night, you've spent an hour listening to some people talking in very obscure ways, you know, in those strange languages, and the computer locks up, and now you've lost all of the work that you've put into it. And you can't hit the thing, you can't yell and scream, it won't do anything. It's very frustrating. As a tanker, part of your job is to go out with a ball-peen hammer and schwack the track with that hammer and listen for whether it rings clear or whether it thuds. And if it thuds, you get a big wrench out and you go and crank it until it's tight.
Adjust it.
You thunk it again and see if it rings. And when it rings clear, you know you did it. So it's satisfying that way. Same when you go out to the range during annual training and put rounds into targets. You know, you punch that button for the trigger, round goes down range, and you can see I put a hole in that chunk of plywood, you know, 1,200 meters down range. You know, you see a result. But after that, I just did that for a couple of years, then got out, came back in later to get commissioned as a judge advocate, again in the Army National Guard. So that was in 1998. I was one of the people who had the honor and the sad privilege of being around Ground Zero. I was there the first couple of weeks of October of '01. I got the sinus infections to show for it.
How lucky.
And then later, the division deployed to Iraq in 2005. So I got to serve there and deal with all those wild and crazy things for the deployment. Afterwards, I helped send the 27th Brigade, which is a lot of New Yorkers from all over the state, off to missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Then I was at the Pentagon for 4.5 years doing various wild and crazy things before I retired as a lieutenant colonel, which, having enlisted as a PFC, it's an interesting thing to have that change of life. But I got around and saw lots of things. In my duties, I had to deal with investigations on everything from suicides, aviation accidents, lost munitions, equal opportunity complaints, investigations, just all kinds of stuff.
Saw all of those as a commander. And a few more.
And as the JAG, my job was to look at these investigations, review them, and then provide an analysis and recommendations to the division commander, later to the Chief of National Guard Bureau, and to various other national agencies on what I saw in the investigations. So
15-6.
You got it, and all those other crazy things. So I've had a very long and diverse career, met lots of people, doing a lot of things in a lot of environments, which has helped me now in my role in the Veterans Defense Program to be able to relate to my clients and the people who could become my clients.
Sure. And tell us a little bit about the defenders and what they actually do here within the state of New York.
Yeah, so in New York, if a person ends up in the justice system, so they could be charged with a misdemeanor, they could be charged with a felony, they could have difficulties or issues in family court, whether it could be back child support. I actually found out you can go to jail because you have not paid your child support, depending on the circumstances. So we, in my program, help the attorneys who are representing these former military members,
Veterans, yes,
understand their clients. Because to a certain extent, you really, when you're a lawyer and you're working with a client, every client's different in some way. But veterans have a different attitude towards authority. They have a different attitude towards accountability. A lot of us have various mental and emotional issues that stem from our service that contribute to the reasons why we're in court, and the difficulties in our attorney understanding us. And of course, the prosecutor or the judge, hardly any of the members are veterans themselves.
Yes.
So communicating with us and understanding us is a chore. So in my job, I'm helping everyone in the system understand who this person is that's sitting there in the courtroom.
And the other thing I've seen is that we have some veterans who don't even really identify, for whatever reason, as being veterans. One of the first things we did here when they started the Veterans Court here on Staten Island was their intake sheet just said something like, "Are you a veteran?"
No.
And we said, no, you have to change that, because we have a number of veterans who don't identify as veterans. Maybe they were in the reserves and never deployed, and federally they're not listed as a veteran. Maybe they're female and for whatever reason don't.
Yeah.
But it's more exact to put, did you ever serve in the armed forces of the United States?
Yeah.
And that you get much more positive answers to. And it's simple things like that we can help these people to not end up in jail.
Yeah.
Because that's what this is about, realistically.
You're very right with that, because if you go back to Vietnam, and I'm Vietnam era, quite a few of the veterans who left the service back then denied being veterans.
True.
And they lived their whole
So you
life.
don't want to be spit on, to be perfectly honest.
I mean, there were guys I worked with in the police department that years went by, and one day we having a discussion, and I served in Vietnam, but I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And there's a guy that never even told you he was a vet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. You still find these things today. In part, there are tens of thousands of veterans from Iraq, Afghanistan, the modern set of wars, who were separated with what they call bad paper.
Yep.
So given a general under other than honorable circumstances for their discharge, in part because they had traumatic brain injury, they had physical injuries, they had post-traumatic stress. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people in the service who don't believe in these things, and they end up seeing any problem as being a disciplinary problem. And so, you have trouble showing up in the morning because you can't sleep from the post-traumatic stress.
Yep.
That's a personal problem. Again, we're inculcated. We have to be strong inside. If you're weak inside, that's a personal problem. So if you've got this, they just dump on you. So these people were just unceremoniously booted out and given bad paper. They're not going to say that they're a veteran. They got out in a way that makes them hate the military. Then there are other folks that don't have that bad experience, but when you look at things like if you're applying for a civil service job, in order to get veterans credits, you need to have a ribbon for a deployment showing that you actually deployed for a combat tour. And if you don't have that, you don't get the veterans credit. Again, it's changed a little bit, but if you're still starting from that where, hey, guess what? I served in Alaska in the 90s.
Yep.
I'm not a veteran. My kid went to Afghanistan in 2014. Yep. He's a veteran. I'm not. So, we've got all these things that can make it hard for someone to say, yeah, I'm a vet. Again, also with that sense, if we've got someone in the justice system, sense of shame, sense of failure, a sense of, you deserve whatever you got coming, that you don't want to bring shame on the military. Yep. Or if you had something that was wrong in the military, you don't want that dug up and added to your problems now. Oh, you had an Article 15, non-judicial punishment back when you were on a ship, in the Persian Gulf back in the 1980s. Yeah, and now, no, I'm not going to say that because now they're going to drag it up and use that against me now that I've got my DWI and my second DWI, and they're going to take, threatening me with a felony if I, don't act exactly right. It's a crazy set of circumstances that these folks deal with.
Do you find post-traumatic stress as an uphill defense with the current day prosecutors? Because, and I think we sent earlier that not very many of the prosecutors or even judges are veterans, and coming from an era when I got separated from the service, everybody was a veteran.
Yeah.
Or 90% of the people were.
No.
But now PTSD is a relatively new phrase, a term. Okay. Is that an uphill fight using that as a defense?
Well, what you're doing is you're humanizing the defendant. Because again, we've got these philosophies of punishment and in law enforcement that say you broke the law, you need to be punished. And if someone has been acting weird or they've fallen down a rabbit hole of drug dependency because they're trying to deal with these demons inside, they didn't break the law because they're bad, knuckleheads. They happen to get fouled up as the result of these things. If you communicate that through, largely, most prosecutors and most judges will react favorably and say, all right, we understand. We're trying to make you better. We're not trying to kick you when you're down. That's not always the case.
And sending them to prison is not going to help.
And I have
to be perfectly honest, I can't see any experience I've had with any of the people that I'm dealing with in the courts. I can't see how sending them to prison would help them. In fact, I actually think it would make them worse.
It ends up being a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes you do get in trouble for doing something that really, you can't just let someone go. Again, we've got all the understanding of how they got there. But nonetheless, there may be situations where, there are situations where, no, I'm sorry, you need to do some time. Mm-hmm. The state prison system has made efforts to include treatment programs, to have housing for veterans because we are a different population. We're not gangbangers, We're not just rattleheads who, are narcissistic, beat up everyone in sight. We are different and we can be reached differently. And there are treatments and ways to kind of push our buttons in a good way so that we respond favorably. And again, how this gets across to the judges, how this gets across to the prosecutors.
That's your job.
It depends a lot, or it varies a lot around the state, from court to court, county to county, DA to DA. Some of them really don't care. They're just bean counters. They're out to throw people in jail. They're out to get the max time they can. They don't want to hear any excuses. They don't want to hear anything. There are a lot, though, that are good people who are trying to do good. And again, I speak maybe with a little bit of bias. I am a lawyer, I'm sorry. But nonetheless, the people who are concerned about the individual, they actually see the defendant as a person and not as a case, as a file that just gets stamped and sent along its way according to whatever game they want to play.
And I think it's interesting. I've dealt with 6 defendants here in Veterans Court in Staten Island, and 4 of them have graduated. So they've at least gotten through the court system to the point where they're really rehabilitated enough to get back into life through treatment, through plans like that to get them back on their feet. All 6 of them, in my estimation, have some form of PTSD, some worse than others, some lighter than others. 2 of them, I know for a fact, had traumatic brain injuries. And after 6 people in 2 years, you start to say to yourself, gee, what's the next, what's the problem here? The problem here seems to be that we've got people that got out of the service with undiagnosed issues and are back in the civilian world. It just, the transition is horrible, to be as blunt as I can be about it, from military back into civilian. And I've used my own experience, which we talked about before. I was over 2 years in Iraq. I came back to Fort Bragg, and 5 days later I was back on the street in New York. And I will tell you that I have a mild form of PTSD. I absolutely hate being in wide open places. I'm used to being behind concrete because every place in Iraq was concrete to keep you from getting shelled. I feel very nervous. Loud noises in me do not agree. Never had that issue before. These, to me, that's a mild form of PTSD.
Yeah.
And the transition was not there. There was I never saw a doctor. My hearing loss was undiagnosed until I went to the VA afterwards. These are all things that we are putting back into society, and unless we do a better job of transitioning these people, we're going to have them showing up in court, and that's what you're getting.
Yeah, actually, I think part of the thing is it's not so much the transition as the long-term kind of continuity of community among us veterans. Again, I've got clients that, Vietnam vets, who end up having their issues emerge in the 2000s. So, a lifetime, 20, 30 years later, and they were by themselves. And again, part of the post-traumatic stress is the ability to digest that experience and to really get it there. Again, there are some things that require deeper therapy, but you just can't digest it. We can speak to one another with a degree of familiarity. When I try to talk to my wife or my kids are a little bit more curious, but I start talking war stories with my wife. She's like, whatever, she can't relate to it. And I understand, she can't relate. And, other civilian people, they cannot relate to the stuff that, if we're talking about shining boots or, talking about an E5 when we were in E4 or, the captain or whatever, we can understand these things and laugh or cry or, whatever, get angry from these experiences because we share them. The civilian, you just don't. You don't understand these things. You can't relate to it. If all you had is watching a movie,
right.
Hamburger Hill or Rambo, it's like, no, you don't get it. I'm sorry. It just...
Exactly. And the movies are not a good example. I think you'll find a lot of the defendants in the defendant program are without family. for the
I've had
most
a
part,
good portion of mine were just going through my head right now.
the families don't understand PTSD. The wives certainly don't understand. Hence, the marriage just kind of dissolves because the wife sees him as a psycho or something, not understanding there's a causing factor for all of this behavior.
Yeah, some of this, it's not so much that you've wigged out as, like when I came home, I'm used to having a mission and a purpose. And I'm working with people who have a deadline, they've got resources. You say we're going to do something tomorrow, we're going to do it. Here's the timeline. And you do reverse planning. Right. We're going to do this on Thursday. Okay, I got to have this done by Wednesday, which means I need to be making these decisions on Tuesday. And that's not how you do things.
And by the way, there's somebody next to you. Yeah, you got to do this in order to get there, right? Your piece of this is done.
And when you say do something, people do it. They salute and they drive on. You can't do that with your kids. Can't do that with your wife. Right. When you go to work, the office environment doesn't lead itself to that. So you can end up looking like you're very short-tempered, impatient, you're feeling confined, And again, I think when you get to the folks who are in the treatment courts without family, they had family. Okay. They lost them along the way.
Exactly.
You got this division, and that can just make things even worse.
Right.
You lose even more connection with that world. If you don't have your vet guys to hang out with, now you're hanging by yourself.
Yep.
And that's when you're at a greater risk of the drug abuse, the alcohol abuse. So many guys climb into a bottle. Yeah. By the time you get to these, the problem has already been there and festering.
That shows the importance of the mentor program.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And by the way, from what I've seen in the veterans treatment courts, the mentors are key. Yep. The mentors make so much of the difference.
Because now you got a buddy again.
Yeah. Yep. You got
somebody taking care of you.
Someone that you can relate to and talk with.
Yep.
And help get you steered.
Without that, I don't think it would work. I really don't.
And it takes a very special mentor to be able to put up with that, becoming you're the crutch now.
Yeah.
And he's going to come to you every time he's starting to fall. And you have to have the patience and the understanding to stay with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there is training that mentors can go through. I'm assuming you went through some training or orientation.
Well, my point on that
hard
is
knocks.
My point on that is after 35 years in the military as a NCO and an officer, I was halfway decent at mentoring, but the training that they do have in New York is not the best because it's not veteran centric. It is more drug court centric.
Yeah.
So it tells you some of the things, but it doesn't get you into the details. Actually, Pennsylvania has a better one online if you should ever want to look at it.
Interesting, most
because
definitely.
We've been advocating for something like that from New York. Because realistically, your mentor is your mentor, and some are good and some are bad.
Yeah.
So,
Roy, if somebody is out there watching this program right now or watching it on YouTube, because we go on YouTube with all these programs, and they feel that, all right, my dad was a Vietnam vet, and I think he needs help. And there's something, wrong. He's doing crazy,
Yeah.
Is there an office or a place you would recommend they go to get help?
In New York, every county, as I understand it, has a veterans service officer.
yes.
So you can pick
Here
up the
in
phone.
Richmond County, it's Tony Tsay.
Yeah, there you go. You can call them. They're really keyed in on all the services and providers that are available, whether it's psychological services, whether it's helping people who are homeless, all these different support nets that are there. So that's really your key. If you end up in the justice system, at the VA centers, there is a VJO, Veteran Justice Outreach Officer.
Yep.
So that VJO can help you find either a public defender or hook you up with us. Again, our job is to help the lawyer as opposed to being your representative.
Right.
So there's only so much that we can do, but that's really our forte. So that's really the primary thing to do is look them up, call a county, call a Veterans Administration Center, and ask for a VJO, Veteran Justice Outreach Officer.
Yep. And one of the things that we've stressed in a number of these shows is the veteran organizations that are out there, the American Legion, the VFW. One of the reasons to join these is because then you have a set of buddies around you again, male or female.
Yes.
And you have somebody to talk to. You have somebody that you can call up and say, hey, that's the important reason to join. That is a part of it. And also, I know for a fact in my Legion and in my VFW post, I've been asked several times, well, who should I talk to? Yeah. And it's here. Here's the contact.
Yep.
Because I've got it from the courts. If there is a lawyer out there, a defender out there, who has a case that he could use some assistance with, how would they get in touch with you, Roy?
Yeah, so if you have a veteran or someone that you think is a veteran who you'd like to get to understand better, you can call me at area code 518-795-0921. So that's my electronic leash, my cell number, for my official purposes. So again, I cannot be the lawyer, but if you are a lawyer with a client, or if you're the client and you would like to have some help talking with your lawyer, same thing, you can always give me a call. I'm here to help translate, the military experience into the civilian system. But the key is really, by the time they get to me, in the court system, things have already gone wrong.
Yeah.
And it's really important for people to get help, get themselves keyed in before they get there. No one wants to have to deal with the suicide hotline if someone is sinking and they can be thrown a lifeline before they get to that point.
Yep.
And I don't want people to need to go to court with a DWI or the breaking and entering because they needed money to support their drug habit because they've been self-medicating too much for too long. We want to get people help before then. Yep. But if that's where you're at, we take you where you happen to be right now, not where we wish you were or where you might have been. It's where you are now.
Thank you for watching In Honor Of. We love you for watching. We will continue to bring new programs like this